She knows what people will say. She has already heard it, probably more than once, from friends who lower their voices slightly when they ask about him, from family members who choose their words carefully but cannot quite hide the question behind their eyes, from strangers who do the quiet math when they see the two of them together and arrive at a conclusion without asking a single thing about who either of them actually is. She knows the narrative the world has already written about her choice, and she has chosen him anyway. That is the part most people skip over entirely, the choosing, the conscious, clear-eyed, fully informed choosing of a man whose years outnumber hers by 2 decades or more. The world wants to explain it away, to reduce it to something manageable, something that fits inside an easy box. But the moment you start actually listening to the women who make this choice, really listening, you begin to realize that the easy explanations are not just incomplete. They are almost entirely wrong. What most people don't realize is that the conversation about age gap relationships has never really been about age at all. It has been about something far more uncomfortable to examine, something that challenges fundamental assumptions about attraction, maturity, and what women actually want when no one is telling them what they are supposed to want. Stay with me here. The first thing the world reaches for is the father figure explanation. It is the most common, the most dismissive, and the one that women in these relationships find the most deeply frustrating. The assumption is that she is searching for a parental substitute, that some wound in her history is driving her toward an older man as a form of psychological compensation. And while it is true that our early attachments shape our relational patterns, to reduce every age gap relationship to unresolved childhood dynamics is to fundamentally misunderstand what is actually happening in the room when these two people are together. Think about it. If the father figure theory were accurate, you would expect these relationships to be characterized by dependency, by an imbalance of power so severe that the younger woman is essentially helpless, guided entirely by the older man's preferences and decisions. But that is not what these relationships look like from the inside. More often than not, the younger woman in a genuine age gap relationship is remarkably self-possessed. She knows her own mind. She is frequently the one who pursued the connection or at the very least matched it with equal intention. She is not lost. She is not damaged. She has simply made a choice that the people around her are not equipped to understand. There is something deeper happening here. To understand what that something is, you have to begin where attraction actually begins. Not in the superficial layer of physical appearance, though that matters. Not in the practical layer of compatibility, though that matters too. Attraction at its most fundamental level is a response to a quality of presence, to something felt before it is named. And there is a particular quality of presence that tends to develop in men who have lived enough, struggled enough, and reflected enough to stop performing and simply become. Imagine being in a room with someone who has nothing left to prove, not because they have given up, but because they have already done the work of finding out who they are. Someone whose confidence does not require your validation to remain intact. Someone who can sit in silence without it becoming uncomfortable, who can disagree with you without it becoming a confrontation, who can receive your emotion without being destabilized by it. That quality, that settled, undefended way of existing in the world, is extraordinarily rare. And it tends not to appear in men who are still in the middle of constructing themselves. This is where things become interesting. Young men are, by and large, still becoming. This is not a criticism. It is simply the nature of the process. They are still testing identities, still measuring themselves against the world, still figuring out which parts of themselves are real and which parts are armor. And there is energy and excitement and genuine beauty in that process. But it also means that a relationship with someone in that stage of life carries a particular kind of instability, an instability that some women find thrilling and others find exhausting. And the women who find it exhausting, the ones who have already developed a strong enough sense of themselves to know what they actually need rather than what they have been told to want, are often the ones who eventually find themselves drawn to something entirely different. What most people don't realize is that for many younger women who choose older men, the choice is not a retreat from something. It is an advance toward something, an advance toward a quality of relating that simply requires more time to develop than most young men have had. Now we move deeper. There is a concept in psychology called co-regulation. It refers to the way that one person's nervous system can influence and stabilize another person's. When you are with someone who is genuinely calm, genuinely grounded, genuinely at peace with who they are and where they stand, your own nervous system begins to mirror that state. You relax in ways you cannot fully explain. You feel safer than the circumstances alone would warrant. You become more fully yourself because you are not spending emotional energy managing the instability of the person beside you. For a younger woman who is navigating the genuine difficulty of building her own identity, her own career, her own sense of what her life is meant to become, this co-regulating effect is not a small thing. It is not mere comfort. It is the difference between a relationship that drains her and a relationship that gives her more capacity to grow. The older man who has done his inner work, who is not at war with himself, who does not need her to manage his emotional weather, offers her something that functions almost like a base camp, a stable place from which to explore the more uncertain terrain of her own becoming. We'll come back to what that means for how these relationships actually function. But before we go there, there is another layer that almost no one discusses. She is not just choosing him, she is choosing the version of herself that she becomes when she is with him. This is crucial, and it is almost entirely absent from every public conversation about age gap attraction. Because the most powerful relationships in any person's life are not the ones that feel good. They are the ones that make you more. The ones that create the conditions for you to grow into a fuller version of who you already are. And when a younger woman finds, often for the first time, a man who does not feel threatened by her intelligence, who does not need her to be smaller so that he can feel larger, who is genuinely curious about who she is rather than who he needs her to be, something opens in her that she may not have known was closed. Think about it. How many of the relationships she has had before gave her permission to be completely herself, to be ambitious and feminine simultaneously, to be emotionally complex without it being treated as a problem, to have opinions that differ from his without the dynamic between them cracking under the weight of it? These are not small things. These are the conditions that determine whether a person expands or contracts inside a relationship. And the man who has genuinely grown, who has resolved enough of his own insecurities to stop projecting them outward, tends to create those conditions almost naturally. What happens next is important. There is also something she receives from him that is harder to articulate, but perhaps the most powerful of all: perspective. He has already stood in the futures she is afraid of and found that they were survivable. He has already navigated the professional uncertainty, the identity confusion, the loss, the failure, the reconstruction that she is still somewhere ahead of on her own timeline. And so when she brings her fears to him, she is not met with someone who shares those fears. She is met with someone who has already been through the door she is standing in front of. That is not just reassuring, it is orienting. It gives her a kind of compass that is almost impossible to find in someone who is exactly where she is. The deeper truth is that what she is receiving is not rescue. It is witness. The witness of someone who has lived enough to understand that the things she is afraid of are almost always more survivable than they appear from the outside. And that understanding, communicated not through advice but through the simple stability of his presence, is among the rarest and most valuable gifts one human being can offer another. Now we arrive at what this conversation has been building toward all along. The reason younger women choose older men, when they make that choice with clarity and intention rather than confusion or desperation, is not because they are broken or because they are looking for a father or because they cannot compete for younger partners. The reason is far more interesting and far more challenging than any of those explanations. It is because they have developed, earlier than most, the ability to recognize something that the culture around them has not given them a vocabulary to articulate. They have recognized that the most important qualities in a long-term partner have almost nothing to do with the year they were born. They have recognized that emotional maturity, self-awareness, genuine security, the capacity to love without losing oneself, these things are not given by age, but sometimes cultivated by it. And they have decided, with full knowledge of what people will say and think, to choose what is actually real over what is socially convenient. That is not immaturity. That is among the clearest forms of maturity available to a person. And so the question shifts. Because the question that opened this conversation, why would she choose someone so much older, was always the wrong question. The question was operating from the assumption that the age gap was the anomaly requiring explanation. But what if the real anomaly is not the age gap at all? What if the real anomaly is the quality of man she found? What if the rarity is not the age difference, but the depth, the settledness, the genuine self-possession that she responded to? The question worth asking, the one that actually serves you, is not about age. It is about the man you are becoming through everything you have lived. It is about whether the years you have accumulated have made you deeper or merely older. Whether the difficulty you have walked through has built something real in you or simply left marks. Whether the presence you carry into a room is one that creates safety, expansion, and the particular kind of freedom that allows another person to be fully themselves. That is the question she is answering when she chooses you, not how old you are, who you have become. If this opens something for you, there is much more to explore. Stay close.